You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hi, I'm Annie from the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. The podcast hosted by two women who never met in real life, but who share a love for all animals, even the ones who are hated by many people.
That's right. If you're a regular listener, welcome back, you wonderful hellions you. You already know the drill. So just grab your emotional support beverage, your favorite blankie, and settle in. If you're new here, hi. Hi.
Hi.
There. We're really glad you found us. This is Fresh Hell, the podcast where we explore murder, mystery, and the macabre throughout history. And of course, we occasionally take a break from the grim stuff to celebrate the good guys, the loyal companions, and the surprisingly heroic animals of the Fresh Hell pet wall of fame. The FHPWOF, if you will. Before we start, we as always want to give a very quick shout out to every single one of our amazing patrons. You keep the show running, caffeinated, and occasionally well fed.
Yeah, I just had chocolate.
Yeah, especially during episodes that involve this much pigeon research. You would be very surprised at how deep the pigeon rabbit hole goes. It's funny, Paul was like, I told him we were recording today, and he was like, oh, what's the episode? And I said, today's going to be a hard one. We're going to be talking about pigeons. And he was like, pigeons? He's like, how is that on brand? And I'm like, oh, do you not know how many pigeons have died for us? And he's like, okay, calm down. I know you're passionate about pigeons.
Well, afterwards, you're all gonna know.
Yeah.
If you'd like to join our little community of hellions, head over to patreon.com, search for Fresh Hell Podcast. You'll get early access to ad-free episodes, bonus content, our very loving, very chaotic live get-togethers. If you enjoy the dark, the strange, the heroic birds with medals, maybe consider becoming a patron.
Yes.
That's it. That's all we're going to say about that.
That's right. Also, well, the other thing we should mention, now that we run ads for some actual revenue from the podcast, you also get ad-free over on Patreon. If you've been listening for 6 years and you're like, oh, I want to stay ad-free, you know what to do. And if you can't, just hit that skip button. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, hellions old and new. Now, it's time to talk about pigeons. And this topic, like most animal topics, is very dear to our hearts. We wanted to do this episode for a while. I am particularly passionate about pigeons. Like, I do a lot of, well, did you know to strangers about pigeons? You might be listening to this right now because I did that to you and then gave you my card. Because pigeons get such an unfair reputation, really. Somewhere along the way, these incredible, beautiful, intelligent, loyal birds went from being trusted messengers and literally decorated war heroes to being called sky rats.
Guilty. Years and years ago, I too was indoctrinated enough to absolutely despise pigeons. Don't get me wrong, I love animals and I would never hurt an animal. But I didn't care for pigeons, let's say it like this. I thought they were disgusting and dirty and a health risk and bad for the cities. But then I learned and I knew better and I want to share what I learned. And maybe someone out there can then be like, damn, I still don't care for pigeons too much, but hey, they're cool and I just let them be. And that's all I really ask of you. And that's a really big step forward, right?
It really is. Plus, I personally really don't like it if I have formed an opinion on false information. It happens all the time. It happens to all of us all the time, every day, right? But I hate it when I realize that I have a conviction that was actually completely based on false narrative. And so, like, anytime, like, it's okay if they're not for you, but at least know the truth, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, the fact that humans hate pigeons so much says a lot more about us, unfortunately, than it does about them. If you want to talk about disgusting rats that won't stop breeding. People, it's people. I mean, it's true, right? We are the worst. And here's another example of why we're the worst. So humans bred pigeons. We domesticated them. We used them in war and in communication, necessary communication for thousands of years. And then, when we didn't need them anymore, we abandoned them and turned them into a scapegoat, and we turned our own pets into pests. It's unconscionable, honestly.
Yeah. Pigeons didn't do anything wrong. They just adapted to survive in the world we built, and then we rejected them from this world. So today, we want to clear their name, aufklären, as we'd say in German, and tell the real story of these birds, the science, the history, the heroism, hopefully maybe some funny moments too, but most of all, we want to give pigeons back the respect they have more than earned. Let's start with what pigeons actually are, beyond the stereotype we all have of them, or had. The pigeons you see in cities all over the world are descendants of the rock dove or Columba livia. Their ancestors lived along the sea cliffs in Europe, North Africa, Western Asia. They were nesting in cracks and on ledges high above the ground, which is why pigeons feel right at home on windowsills and under bridges. We kind of unknowingly rebuilt their natural habitat in concrete and steel and stone. Biologically, pigeons are extraordinary. Their navigational abilities are among the best in the animal kingdom. Homing pigeons can find their way home from hundreds of miles away, even when released in completely unfamiliar locations. Scientists still don't fully understand how they even do that, but we know they rely on several cues. The Earth's magnetic field, the position of the sun, landmarks, and even their sense of smell. So basically, a pigeon can be taken across mountains, released, and then she'll still fly straight home. It's so extraordinary and almost magical. And they're not just navigational geniuses, they're emotionally complex and surprisingly intelligent.
Pigeons can recognize themselves in mirrors as well, which is something only a handful of species can do.
Yeah, exactly. The list of creatures to be able to do that is actually surprisingly short. Humans, obviously, though even we need about 2 years of life before we figure out that reflection over there is actually us. Then there are chimpanzees, bonobos, orangutans, and dolphins, elephants, and magpies. And that's it. Those are the golden standard species for self-awareness. And pigeons, believe it or not. And I can hear some of you go, but Johanna, what about dogs? My dog can recognize herself in the mirror, and yes, you are right, some can. But dogs are funny when it comes to mirrors. Most of them fail the classic self-recognition test. And that's not because they're dumb, it's because they don't care about visual cues the way we do. Their primary sense is smell, not sight, so a reflection in glass doesn't mean much to them. A whiff of their own scent, well, that's the revelation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And to be fair, pigeons don't pass the mirror test spontaneously. It's not like every time they look in a mirror, they're checking themselves out, right? But if they're trained, they understand that the reflection corresponds to their own body. And they can even use the mirror to locate a mark on their feathers, for example, which is something that most animals cannot even conceptualize. A pigeon can learn something that's beyond the reach of almost every other living creature. We're talking about a bird that shares cognitive territory with dolphins and elephants, but it still can't get through a city park without someone calling it a stupid, disgusting sky rat. They can also distinguish between letters of the alphabet, between different people's faces, and even between paintings by different artists. In one study, they learned how to peck at Monet's Impressionist works and ignore Picasso's Cubism. And they kept on getting it right, even when new paintings they'd never seen before were introduced. In another, they could identify whether a photograph contained a tree or a person, even if the images were completely unfamiliar. This is not a dumb bird. In fact, this bird is smarter than a lot of the people calling it a dumb bird. They're also one of the few species where both parents take equal care of their young. Pigeons mate for life, and both male and female share the duty of incubating the eggs and feeding the chicks. What they feed is unique as well, something called crop milk. It's a protein and fat-rich secretion that's produced in the pigeon throat. It's similar in purpose to mammalian milk, and both mother and father pigeons make it. In the wild, pigeons can live over a decade, though city life does cut that short. Pollution, traffic, and hunger take their toll. Still, they endure, and they've followed humans through every era of civilization. Pigeons have always lived beside us, and they've always been underestimated. It's easy to forget that not long ago, pigeons were cherished. They're symbols of love, loyalty, and peace. The dove that is so often used in art and religion to represent purity is a white pigeon. For thousands of years, these birds were sacred, admired, and an important part of human life.
Yeah, pigeons lived with us for such a long time. The relationship between people and pigeons goes back to at least 5,000 years. Ancient Mesopotamians and Egyptians, and it's so often that we get back to those ancient Mesopotamians and Egyptians, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they domesticated them for food, for fertilizer, and already for communication. Egyptian temples contained so-called dove cotes, little pigeon towers, where their droppings were collected, to use it as fertilizer. And in the ancient world, pigeon droppings were valuable enough to be taxed. In Persia and then later in Greece and Rome, pigeons were trained to carry messages. Historians believe that by the 5th century BCE, pigeons were even used to deliver the results of the Olympic Games to distant cities. By the time of the Roman Empire, pigeons had become part of everyday life. Wealthy Romans bred fancy varieties, the military used them to send messages across their empire, and even Julius Caesar reportedly used them during his campaigns. The Mongol Empire had an enormous pigeon post system that spanned thousands of kilometers, and in medieval Europe, castles often had dove cotes as a sign of wealth and privilege. Fast forward to the 19th century, and pigeons were still doing the same job as always. Before telegraphs, before telephones, people used pigeons to send everything, from love letters to business transactions. Reuters, the international news agency, was literally founded on pigeons, and I'm not kidding. In 1850, Paul Julius Reuter used a fleet of trained birds to carry stock prices and news between Brussels and Aachen. His birds regularly made the trip in under 2 hours, beating the fastest trains of the time and carrying crucial financial updates that gave him a competitive edge. Even banks and financiers used pigeon post. The Rothschild, or Rothschild, as you say, I think.
Yeah.
Is the Rothschild. Rothschild family famously transmitted. I'm just laughing because it's a German name.
It's so different. We say Rothschild. And how do you say it?
It's Rothschild here, Rothschild, because shield is, so the name means the red, how do you call this, that knights have, which is not the sword?
Shield.
The shield, thank you. I was kind of blanking out. It's the red shield.
Okay.
That's what the name means.
Got it. Rothschild.
So the Rothschild.
Yeah. Okay.
Because red used to be written like with EH. But anyway.
I had no idea.
So the Rothschild family, or the Rothschild as we say in German, they famously transmitted stock information across Europe via pigeon. These birds were the fastest technology money could actually buy at the time.
That's right. And one of the most impressive things about pigeons, and honestly one of the reasons we depended on them for thousands of years, is their speed and endurance. A trained homing pigeon can cruise comfortably at around 60 to 80 kilometers an hour. That's roughly 37 to 50 miles an hour. And they'll keep that pace for hours and hours at a time. Under perfect conditions, some can even hit 100 kilometers an hour, or around 60 miles an hour. That's the same speed as a car on a highway. And in war, they were nothing short of heroic. And we'll get to that in more detail in a minute. But during the Franco-Prussian War, for example, so 1870 and 1871, Paris was under siege and completely cut off from the outside world. The French government sent messages out on pigeons. not handwritten notes, but microfilmed dispatches containing hundreds of thousands of words. Those tiny rolls of film were attached to pigeon legs, and over the course of the siege, they delivered around 150,000 messages safely out of the city.
Isn't that crazy to think about? And we talk about bird brains as an insult, but pigeons managed international correspondence long before humans did on their own. They crossed mountains, oceans, battlefields, no maps needed, no machines, and when you compare that to the state of modern air travel, I think pigeons come out looking pretty good there. Also, something we tend to forget nowadays, or something many people simply don't know, pigeons weren't just useful. No, sir, they were absolutely beloved animals. Victorian England turned pigeon breeding into an art form. There were hundreds of varieties bred for beauty, for color, or for speed. Pigeon racing became a working-class obsession, particularly in Belgium and northern England. I think it still remains popular to this day in some areas. These were proud, well-tended birds, and people held them in high regard. Then came the wars, and with them the pigeon's greatest moment. Because when the world went into the Great War, so World War I, it wasn't just soldiers and tanks and horses that were mobilized, it was also pigeons. But not just in World War I, during both World War I and World War II, these small birds were really an essential part of military communication. As we said, they were fast, reliable, and unlike radios or telegraphs, they couldn't be jammed or intercepted. And so every major army had its own pigeon corps. Britain's National Pigeon Service operated more than 200,000 birds during the Second World War. France, Germany, the United States, and even the Soviet Union all trained their own flocks of pigeons. Pigeon lofts were built on ships, even in tanks, on airplanes. There were mobile pigeon units mounted on trucks, cages even in submarines, and lofts hidden behind enemy lines. In occupied Europe, resistance groups used them to send coded intelligence to Allied command. Each bird carried a small metal canister attached to one leg, containing thin strips of paper or, as Annie mentioned, microfilm. The message was often written in cipher or code because pigeons, as brilliant as they are not exactly discreet. They could be caught. But yeah, the idea was pretty simple. You carried your pigeon with you into the field, and then when you needed to send a message, you just released one. The pigeon would immediately turn back towards its home loft, no matter how far away that was. When an aircraft went down, pilots sometimes released pigeons with the coordinates, hoping that the birds would reach base before they themselves were lost.
The training process was remarkably gentle. Pigeons were conditioned to associate their home loft with safety and food, which made them return instinctively. Trainers gradually increased the distance of their release points, sometimes hundreds of miles away. Each pigeon had a serial number and a military record. Some even had official ranks. But I would imagine that the birds themselves were blissfully unaware of their promotions.
I guess.
I hope so. Babies. I hate it. I mean, I know it's necessary, but I really struggle with animals used during war. Horses, dogs, pigeons, like all of it.
Yeah,
This episode is going to get, let's see if I can get through it without crying. I'm going to guess not, but you never know. So, in the chaos of war, pigeons provided a lifeline that no machine could match. Radios required electricity and could be intercepted. Messengers could be captured or killed, but a pigeon flying at 80 kilometers an hour across the sky, the success rate was astonishing. Over 95% of messages sent by trained pigeons reached their destination, even under fire. They carried everything from troop movements to SOS signals, weather reports, coded updates, and personal letters from the front. Many messages that they delivered quite literally changed the course of battles and saved countless lives. To understand how crucial they were to the war effort, you only have to look at how the military treated them. The British War Office issued strict orders. Harming or interfering with a service pigeon was punishable by imprisonment. The penalty was the same as damaging government property because, technically, they were government property. Living feathered telegraphs, and their missions weren't easy. They faced anti-aircraft fire, predatory birds, exhaustion, hunger, and storms. Many never returned, and those that did often arrived battered, bloody, and burned, but with the message still attached to their legs.
I think humans have always romanticized the idea of bravery, but there's something, humbling about the courage of these tiny creatures. They had absolutely no concept of sides or of politics. They just had their instinct to fly home, and, that instinct would often save thousands of human lives. All of the hundreds of thousands of pigeons who served in war were absolutely remarkable, but there are a few who stood out. Birds who completed impossible missions, who defied injury and earned honors and medals. And one of these medals was the Dickin Medal. It was the highest honor any animal could receive for wartime bravery, and we already talked about it in our Pet Wall of Fame episodes on dogs and cats. But in case you didn't listen to these 2 episodes, just short info on what it was or what it is. So this is a medal that was created in 1943 by Maria Dickin. She's the founder of the People's Dispensary for Sick Animals, or PDSA. And she wanted a way to officially recognize the courage and service of animals who risked and very often, unfortunately, gave their lives during war. The Dickin Medal is often called the Animal Victoria Cross, and it's awarded under the same strict criteria as the human version. It's a small bronze medallion inscribed with the words "for gallantry" and "we also serve," and is suspended from a green and brown ribbon symbolizing land and air forces. Between 1943 and 1949, 54 Dickin medals were awarded, and 32 of them to pigeons, along with 18 dogs, 3 horses, and 1 cat, and that would be, of course, Simon, the naval cat from our earlier episode. Each recipient citation was officially published and read aloud, just like any human soldiers. The ceremonies were often attended by military officers and, in some cases, even royalty. It's a small medal for creatures that never understood the concept of war heroism, but they earned it just the same.
All right, let's get into some of the stories of these war hero pigeons. First up, Cher Ami, the pigeon who saved the lost battalion. She is, without question, one of the most famous of all the war pigeons. Cher Ami, by the way, is French for dear friend. She was a small, scrappy bird, bred and trained by the British, but serving with the United States Army Signal Corps during the final months of World War I. In October 1918, the Meuse-Argonne offensive was raging in France. Nearly 600 men from the 77th Infantry Division, under the command of Major Charles Whittlesey, had advanced too far into the Argonne forest and were cut off by German troops. They were surrounded, low on food and ammunition, and worst of all, their own artillery units didn't know their position. Friendly fire began falling directly on them. Communication was impossible. Every human runner they sent was either killed or captured, and so they had only one option left: pigeons. Cher Ami was the last pigeon in the coop. Her message capsule was attached to her leg with a desperate plea written on a small piece of onion skin paper, reading, quote, "We are along the road parallel 276.4. Our artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it," end quote. As soon as she was released, German soldiers saw her rise and opened fire. Witnesses later said the air filled with bullets and shrapnel, and Cher Ami was hit almost immediately. Her chest was torn open, she lost an eye, and one leg was nearly severed, dangling by a single tendon. But she kept on flying. She covered the 25 miles. Nope. She covered the 25 miles, 40 kilometers, back to headquarters in just 25 minutes, a mile a minute, while half dead. When she landed, the message capsule was still attached to her shattered leg. The coordinates she carried stopped the friendly bombardment within minutes, and roughly 194 men survived because of her flight. Army medics worked to save her, using what were at the time experimental techniques, surgical cleaning, stitches, even a tiny wooden prosthetic leg, and she survived. The Signal Corps officers who had relied on her insisted on feeding her by hand throughout her recovery. When the war ended, Cher Ami was awarded the Croix de Guerre by the French government for gallantry under fire. The U.S. Army officially credited her with saving nearly 200 lives. When she finally died from her injuries in June of 1919, her body was preserved and sent to Washington, D.C., where she was mounted and displayed at the Smithsonian Institution, where she remains to this day. A small, battered bird behind glass, with one leg and a permanent place in history. In fact, Cher Ami's story became so well known that American school children in the 1920s learned about her in textbooks, but we definitely stopped learning about her by the time I went through school because I had no idea about this sweet, precious little baby. We have a picture of her. She's so tiny, you guys.
It's so sad. It's not gonna get too much better here.
No.
2.5 decades later, so during Second World War, another pigeon would achieve a similar miracle, this one named G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe was a British-trained pigeon and again part of the US Army Pigeon Service stationed in Italy in 1943. And he was small, grey, and rather unremarkable. But he was also the bird who would save an entire battalion from annihilation. In late October of that year, British forces had captured the village of Calvi Vecchia near Monte Cassino much earlier than expected. However, the Allied bombers were already in the air, preparing to destroy the town to drive out German forces, and they were completely unaware that it was now full of Allied troops. Radio communication failed and there was no time to get a message through by runner. So, they turned to G.I. Joe. The message capsule was attached to his leg, and off he went into the morning air, carrying one short, urgent sentence. He flew 32 kilometers or 20 miles in 20 minutes, averaging roughly 96 kilometers an hour, and arrived just as the planes were lining up to drop their payloads. His message reached command with only minutes to spare. The bombing was called off, and more than 1,000 Allied soldiers were saved. For his actions, G.I. Joe was awarded the Dickin Medal by the People's Dispensary for, quote, saving the lives of the Allied forces in the advance of Calvi Vecchia, end quote. And unlike Cher Ami, G.I. Joe survived the war. He was retired to the U.S. Army Signal Pigeon Breeding and Training Center in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, where he lived a long, and we can assume a very well-fed life. He died in 1961, and he was taxidermied and displayed at the U.S. Army Communication Electronics Museum.
He's a really beautiful bird. He is he's a much larger, stouter, healthier-looking bird than tiny, teeny little Mon Ami. And he's got really beautiful green coloration and white all throughout. He's just beautiful. I figure some people might not have access to pictures we post, so. Next up, we have Mary of Exeter, the pigeon who refused to quit. She also looks very tiny, and this is just a black and white picture of her.
Tiny.
But doesn't she look don't you want to tuck her into your pocket, like your hoodie front pouch?
So, you know what? She gives me the attitude of like a spinster lady, but who's, I don't know how to explain it. She's like sassy but well-meaning.
Yes. She kind of has Bean vibes a little bit to me. Like, I feel like she's giving a little bit of judgmental side eye in her picture, but she's tiny.
Yeah, judgmental, definitely. Yeah.
So Mary was part of the British National Pigeon Service during World War II and worked for Special Operations Executive, SOE, carrying coded messages between the French resistance and Allied command in Britain. Her flights took her across the English Channel, one of the most dangerous routes possible, filled with German anti-aircraft fire and predatory hawks. Mary was attacked 3 times in service. On her first mission, she was shot by enemy gunners, but she recovered. On her second, A falcon struck her in midair, tearing her neck. She recovered again. You can actually see the scar on her neck. On her third, shrapnel from a bomb explosion tore into her body and nearly killed her, but she still made it home. Her owner, Cecil Charlie Brewer, was a shoemaker in Exeter. He lovingly tended to her wounds each time and built her tiny leather braces, wing splints, and a neck support so that she could fly again. Against all odds, she returned to duty after each and every injury. In 1942, she even survived one of the German bomb raids that destroyed her pigeon loft in Exeter. Mary's final mission came in 1945, when she successfully carried intelligence from occupied France back to her loft in Exeter. She completed over a dozen missions in total, which is absolutely an astonishing record given the mortality rate for wartime pigeons. For her outstanding endurance and determination, Mary of Exeter received the Dickon Medal in 1945. A bronze statue of her now stands in Exeter, unveiled in 2008, showing her perched proudly, bandaged but unbroken. Her story, unlike many others, ended peacefully. She lived out her days in comfort, and she was buried at the Ilford Animal Cemetery. In 2023, a children's book was published entitled Mary, the Pigeon Who Never Gave Up.
Let's take a little step back and talk about the very first pigeon to receive the Dickon Medal, and that was Winky. And again, very beautiful bird. I think most people who think pigeons are ugly never looked closely at a pigeon.
Oh, they're so pretty.
So, Winky was a blue check hen, and she was serving with Britain's Royal Air Force Coastal Command during World War II. And on 23rd of February 1942, an RAF bomber returning from a mission over Norway was hit by enemy fire and went down in the icy North Sea. That's not good.
No.
But the crew survived the crash, the radio unfortunately was destroyed, and they were freezing in that rubber dinghy 100 miles from land. Their only chance was Winky. Covered in oil and barely able to move her wings, she was released into the freezing wind, and she flew 193 kilometers or 120 miles back to her loft in Brodie Ferry in Scotland without a message. They didn't have a message that they could give her. But don't worry, because her return itself was the message. Her owner, George Ross, immediately contacted the Royal Air Force reporting Winky's condition and time of arrival, and military analysts calculated the likely direction and distance of the downed aircraft based on, wind speed, flight time, and, Winky's usual route. The rescue team found the stranded crew within 15 minutes. 15!
That's amazing.
All 4 men survived. And for this, Winky became the first animal to ever receive the Dickon Medal in 1943, and she was honored for, quote, delivering a message under exceptional difficulties, end quote, even though technically there had been no physical message at all.
Good girl, Winky. Winky.
Winky, isn't that cute?
She's
Winky.
pretty too. She has the green and also the purple. We're going to talk about it more, but yeah, pigeons really are pretty. The next pigeon we're talking about actually doesn't have any color. She's pure white. She would be called the white dove, probably. And it's a pigeon of the RAF Coastal Command, and this pigeon's name was White Vision. And White Vision performed a similar miracle the following year. In October of 1943, a Catalina flying boat carrying 11 airmen was forced to ditch in the Atlantic off the Hebrides during a violent storm. Radio signals were lost, and so White Vision was released into gale force winds with their coordinates. She battled headwinds of over 50 miles an hour for nearly 9 hours, covering 60 miles, 96 kilometers of open ocean. When she finally reached her loft in Tiree, the message was still intact, and the RAF was able to launch a rescue. The men were found alive after 18 hours adrift in freezing water. For her courage and endurance, White Vision was awarded the Dickon Medal, and this was the first time the medal was awarded to a pigeon for maritime rescue. The citation read, quote, "For delivering a message under exceptionally difficult conditions and so contributing to the rescue of an air crew while serving with the RAF in October 1943. End quote.
Then we have Paddy, the Irish hero of D-Day. How would you describe Paddy? Like,
Paddy,
I guess dark gray, white, lots of white and a little bit of dark gray on the neck and on the wings.
I can't tell if it's a black and white or if it looks like a Harlequin Dalmatian pattern, but in gray and white on a bird.
Yeah. Rorschach.
Yeah. It's another good-looking bird.
I don't know. I really have to start looking at pigeons more closely, I think. When Allied forces launched D-Day invasion of Normandy on 6th of June 1944, communication was obviously chaos. Radios jammed, the lines were cut, and everything was so depending on speed. And among the 32 pigeons released that day, one was Paddy, and he was a bird bred in Ireland, and he would become the fastest messenger of the entire invasion. Paddy was released from behind enemy lines in France, carrying the coded message confirming the success of the beach landings, and he flew 370 kilometers or 230 miles across the English Channel in just under 5 hours, beating every other bird in the operation. He delivered his message safely to Pigeon Service headquarters in Hampshire, ensuring that the Allied command knew the landings had succeeded.
He wanted to get home so bad. He's just fly.
He was just like, that sucks, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
And for his service, Paddy was awarded the Dickin Medal on 1st of September 1944 for, quote, the best recorded time with a message from the Normandy operations while serving with the RAF, end quote. After the war, he returned to his owner, Andrew Hughes, in Carnlow, I hope I pronounced it correctly, in County Antrim. It's in Northern Ireland. We talked a lot about it in
Lizzie Halliday,
I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Paddy lived to a ripe old age and died peacefully in 1954. And he was the only Irish pigeon ever to receive the Dickin Medal. In 2019, the town of Carnlow unveiled a bronze statue of Paddy in his honor, inscribed simply with, quote, the pigeon who brought the message home, end quote. I love that.
Oh. Next, we have William of Orange.
I love the names they have.
I know.
I love it.
William of Orange is a British pigeon. And William of Orange, okay, William looks like your stereotypical pigeon. I hate to say there's nothing terribly remarkable about William
it's
of
a black and white photo we have, so we don't know if he has this iridescent.
I'm sure he does. I'm sure he is beautiful. Yeah. Yes. So during the ill-fated and pretty well-known Operation Market Garden, which took place in September of 1944, British paratroopers were dropped behind enemy lines near Arnhem in the Netherlands. Radio communication quickly broke down. Trapped and surrounded, they turned, once again, to pigeons. William of Orange, a British pigeon serving with the Intelligence Corps, was released with a message containing the coordinates of the encircled troops. He flew over 400 kilometers, 250 miles, from Arnhem back to his loft in England in record time. That message helped coordinate a relief effort and saved countless lives. For his service, William of Orange was awarded the Dickin Medal in 1945. His citation read, quote, for delivering a message from the Arnhem Airborne Operation in record time while serving with the Army Pigeon Service in September 1944, end quote.
Another D-Day veteran was Beachcomber, a Canadian pigeon serving with the RAF. On 6th of June 1944, Beachcomber carried intelligence from Allied agents in Normandy back to Britain, crossing the Channel through bad weather and very heavy gunfire. His successful flight provided one of the earliest confirmations that the invasion had begun successfully. And the Dickin Medal citation described his mission as, quote, one of the most outstanding flights from Normandy. By the end of the Second World War, the People's Dispensary for Sick Animals had awarded the Dickin Medal, as we said, to 32. The official total number of pigeons who served during the war exceeds 250,000, spread across all the Allied nations. Many were never named, never decorated, never came home. But humans did what humans do, and most quickly forgot about the outstanding accomplishments of these little feathery friends we had. And they also forgot how many lives they had saved. Humans forgot that for millennia we had relied on pigeons, and after the war, radios and radar and telephones made messenger pigeons obsolete almost overnight. The affection vanished, and within a single generation, pigeons went from symbols of loyalty and courage to filthy nuisances cluttering up city squares. After World War II ended, the armies that had depended on pigeons disbanded their lofts. Thousands of trained birds were released or sold off, or left to fend for themselves. Urbanization had exploded, cities were growing rapidly, and pigeons adapted perfectly to the new environment. Their wild ancestors had nested on cliffs. They nested on high-rises, ledges and bridges, that worked just as well. The cities we built were, from a pigeon's point of view, absolute perfect habitat. Plenty of perches, warm air currents, endless food waste. But what looked like clever adaptability to a biologist looked like an invasion to everyone else. And by 1950s, pigeons were everywhere. They were cooing on balconies and loafing around train stations. They were decorating statues with droppings. The same species that had carried battlefield intelligence now carried the reputation for disease.
The term sky rat first appears in English newspapers in the mid-20th century as city governments began campaigns to control pigeon populations. Public health officials claimed that the birds were vectors of everything from tuberculosis to encephalitis, and the idea stuck, even though scientific evidence never supported it. Modern studies from the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Royal Society for Protection of Birds have all confirmed the same thing. Ordinary contact with pigeons poses no significant health risk. To catch any pigeon-borne illness, a person would need prolonged, unprotected exposure to large accumulations of droppings in enclosed spaces, like cleaning out abandoned attic full of years-old guano. Simply walking through a square feeding pigeons or having them roost nearby does not make anyone sick. But logic doesn't stand a chance against disgust. By the 1960s and 70s, urban wildlife had become a symbol of decay in many Western cities, and pigeons bore the brunt of that prejudice. They were the perfect scapegoat, highly visible, numerous, and most importantly, associated with the working class. Wealthier neighborhoods installed anti-pigeon spikes. Poorer districts simply coexisted with them. When people talk about cleaning up the city, they often meant both removing the pigeons and the people who fed them. It's also important to always remember that these so-called feral pigeons are not wild animals in the usual sense. These are domestic escapees, descendants of birds that human bred for centuries, for millennia. Every pigeon in every city traces its lineage back to a dovecote. We created them, we relied on them, and then we abandoned them. They've never been truly wild. They are a mirror held up to human neglect. In the decades that followed, extermination efforts became brutal. Cities spread poison, destroyed nests, and introduced predator programs. The results were predictably ineffective. Pigeons breed year-round and can raise up to 8 chicks a year in mild climates. Culling only creates temporary gaps in territory that new flocks will quickly fill. The only sustainable way to manage populations, controlling food supply, and encouraging contraceptive feeding stations is still a concept most municipalities resist because hating pigeons is frankly easier than managing them.
And yet, interestingly enough, pigeons continued to serve. In the 1950s and 60s, Cold War intelligence agencies experimented with spy pigeons. And this is not a joke. They were strapping tiny automatic cameras to their backs. The US CIA project was declassified in 2019. Pigeons were released over Soviet facilities to photograph restricted zones, and the technology worked. And the pigeons were now just as much unaware of being Cold War spies as they were of being war heroes. Pigeons just doing what pigeons do.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, popular culture turned pigeons into comic relief. In movies and cartoons, they became the punchlines. They're messy, bumbling, greedy. Disney's Mary Poppins has the famous Feed the Birds scene played for melancholy. But by the time Home Alone 2 came out, the pigeon lady, I think we all were scared of her as a kid. She was shorthand for, loneliness. The idea of being kind to pigeons became almost, you should pity a person who is crazy enough to be kind to pigeons in a way. I think that was the message very often.
Absolutely. That's how I was treated when I first went. Yeah.
And I mean, we should never forget, only a few decades earlier, feeding pigeons was considered a civic virtue. In London's Trafalgar Square, tourists once bought sanctioned pigeon feed from government-approved vendors. Vienna, Paris, New York, they all had central squares where feeding pigeons was encouraged. It was a ritual of coexistence and everyday connection to nature in a way. And then came the backlash, and Trafalgar Square banned pigeon feeding, I think in 2003. Vienna has "Do not feed the pigeon" signs plastered across the city, and I have to admit it's even worse. We have or had signs, I'm not sure if they're still up. And the sign says, literally, wer Tauben füttert, füttert Ratten. So it means translated, who feeds pigeons, feeds rats. And I know they mean if you throw around food for pigeons, you also attract rats. But I think the association they want to plant in people's heads is pretty obvious. And the sign also comes with a pigeon-rat hybrid. And you can be fined if you indeed feed pigeons. You're looking at the...
I'm looking at the picture you sent me.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like a pigeon body and a rat head on it.
It's so upsetting. When my dad had cancer, he got sick right after my first husband died and was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. And thank God, after he had a surgery and he had a year of chemo, and he has, knock wood, been cancer-free for a long time now. But my point is that during that time, we got him some bird feeders because he was just home a lot more. And they get such beautiful birds on Cape Cod, like the hummingbirds, mostly cardinals, goldfinches, all these really pretty birds. But he actually had to stop feeding the birds because he was getting rats. But not a single pigeon ever came to his no pigeons. So birdseed can attract rats. Sure it can. But that's not a pigeon problem. That's a food problem. And there's a psychological term for this environmental intolerance. When people feel overcrowded, stressed, or powerless, they often displace that frustration onto small, visible irritation, like noise, litter, or pigeons. The birds become an easy symbol for everything people dislike about urban life. They remind us of our own waste, our loss of control, and the chaos we ourselves built. And yet, the pigeons haven't done anything wrong. The feral flocks we see today live on crumbs and rainwater, building nests from whatever they can find: wire, cigarette butts, twigs, bits of paper. They are survivors of human civilization, not parasites on it. Ecologically, they even play a role. They're dropping fertilized city soil and provide food for raptors like peregrine falcons, whose populations are now thriving because pigeons are so abundant. Urban ecologists often describe pigeons as ecosystem engineers. They are a part of the system, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, the thing with the peregrine falcons is also true in Vienna. We have a lot of them now because of the pigeons. I think they even kind of tried to place them there into the Vienna, the towers of the churches, bell towers and things like this.
To keep the pigeons away.
And I think that's okay. That's nature, right?
That's right. And that's why it's so important not to poison them.
Exactly that. The poison is the worst, yeah. And seriously, ask someone today, do me the favor, ask someone today after you listen to this episode what they think of pigeons. And I bet you, most likely, you're gonna hear dirty, annoying, disease-ridden, they destroy buildings is another thing you often hear, that the droppings are so acidic that they're literally eating away at the stone. But is that even true? Kind of, yeah. We have to admit that one.
It's a yes and no.
Well, let us elaborate here.
Yes.
Pigeons can cause problems, especially when it comes to historic architecture. The real issue, though, isn't the pigeons themselves. It's what happens when large colonies settle in the same place for years without maintenance. Their droppings can accumulate, and while they won't dissolve stone overnight, they can slowly erode delicate surfaces like limestone or marble. The moisture and mild acidity can stain facades or weaken mortar joints over time. And inside historic attics or towers, droppings can attract insects or cause sanitation problems if they're not cleaned up regularly. But there are humane and practical ways to manage this, ways that don't involve poison or spikes or other cruelty. Simple deterrents like netting, angled ledges, or ultrasonic devices, which I'm not a fan of it, but I'm also not that educated on them to really have an opinion. I know they disturb my dogs. That's why I'm not a fan of them. But,
that makes sense.
It's also a possibility. And yeah, so these things can keep pigeons from roosting in these vulnerable areas. Many cities, as we said before, use contraceptive feed, and that safely reduces pigeon populations without harming the birds. Regular cleaning and maintenance matter. A few hours of work every season can prevent years of buildup.
That's right. I love feeding the pigeons in Barcelona. I've got lots of pictures of me with pigeons on me we can share. I enjoy them very much. Shout out to the pigeons of Barcelona. Las Palomas. But yeah, the way we talk about pigeons as pests or problems, it often ignores the fact that they're only here because we built the perfect habitat for them and then left it unattended. If they're making a mess, it's because we've given them nowhere else to go. Studies from English Heritage and the Vienna City Wildlife Department all say the same thing. Pigeons are not a structural threat. The damage they cause is, quote, aesthetic rather than architectural, meaning it looks bad, but it doesn't actually hurt the building. And I think it's definitely worth reminding ourselves that for centuries, pigeons weren't vermin. They were sacred. In ancient Mesopotamia, they were associated with the goddess Ishtar, the symbol of love and fertility. The same symbolism passed down into the dove of Christianity, the Holy Spirit descending in the form of a white pigeon, or dove. In Victorian times, they were symbols of fidelity and devotion. The word dove and pigeon both come from the same root. We just chose the prettier word when we want to sound sentimental. Pigeons have lived alongside humans for 5,000 years, longer than cats in most parts of Europe. They've been food, messengers, soldiers, friends, and symbols. And when we stopped needing them, we didn't just forget about them, we vilified them. So now the same species that carried battlefield intelligence is shooed away from train stations. They still mate for life. They still recognize human faces. They know if you're nice to them or not. They care for their babies. They're still here, against every attempt to poison, net, or spike them. They remember who's kind and who isn't. They live quietly among us, carrying a history that most people have forgotten, and that is why they deserve this episode. There's the Animals in War Memorial in London's Hyde Park, where pigeons are depicted flying through the carved archway of stone. The inscription reads, "They had no choice." And that's the essence of it. Pigeons didn't fight for nations or ideologies. They flew because they were trained to go home. And in doing so, they became heroes. These small, fragile creatures, weighted down with metal canisters, crossing skies full of gunfire, they didn't know what they carried or why it mattered. But because they flew, thousands of people lived to see home again.
The more you read about pigeons, the more you realize that we've seriously underestimated them. For starters, pigeons actually see ultraviolet light, which means they perceive colors we can't even imagine. When we look at them and see dull gray, another pigeon sees iridescent blues and greens and purples, basically a glittery disco ball with feathers. And those funny little head bobs they do when they walk? That's not an attitude, it's actually how they stabilize their vision. It's like a built-in image stabilization system that keeps the surrounding perfectly steady when they move. They are also capable of things that sound made up, like sensing earthquakes before they happen. Really, scientists think they can detect low-frequency vibrations and infrasound. The same sort of deep, rumbling waves that elephants apparently can hear. There are actual records of pigeons behaving erratically hours before major earthquakes. And then there's the math, yes. Pigeons can do math, they can count. They can tell the difference between 2 and 3 objects, for example. They understand sequences. Some even grasp the idea of 0. A few human toddlers can't even manage that.
Yeah, and human toddlers are also not out there flying at 60 miles an hour while doing it. Toddlers are lame.
No, they're not.
They can't do anything.
That's true. They are also surprisingly polite, socially speaking. In one experiment, pigeons watched people compete for food and later chose to approach the nicer person, so the one who was more likely to share.
This breaks my heart. It really does, because it means that when people are mean to them and every day you see people being literally all the time, if you see a pigeon, you'll see someone being mean to one unnecessarily. And it's they know. They're not stupid. They know you've taken time out of your day to be mean to them.
Yeah, they actually recognize human social behavior and remember who treats them well, which honestly should all of you out there make you want to be nicer when you walk past them. Here's one of my favorites. I love that one. And I know Annie will too. Pigeons have regional accents. A 2004 study found that pigeons in different cities have distinct cooing patterns, so local dialects. Viennese pigeons sound different from London pigeons. The cousins in New York sound, again, completely different. So yeah, somewhere out there, there's a pigeon speaking fluent Viennese, rolling the R's and everything. It's a Disney movie in the waiting, I tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another detail that blows my mind. Pigeons coo in color. Because they see ultraviolet light, their iridescent neck feathers shimmer differently depending on mood, light, and even mating displays. It's communication, just in wavelength, that we can't see. Speaking of communication, they are excellent at it. They can remember hundreds of human faces for years, recognize specific words, shapes, even differentiate between friendly and hostile expressions, which I think plays into the whole they know who's the more likely to give them food.
Yes, babies. They've also been part of human culture for so long that they've evolved right alongside us. They've lived on every continent except Antarctica. They've inspired gods, artists, and scientists. NASA even studied their navigational skills in the 1970s when they were designing spacecraft guidance systems. When pigeons fly home, they're literally using the same magnetic cues that now guide our satellites. So no, they're not just city birds. They're mathematicians, linguists, navigators, and survivors. Feathered little polymaths that share our sidewalks and don't even get a thank you. Next time you see one strutting around a public square, just remember, that bird could probably recognize your face, predict the weather, and navigate home using the magnetic field of the Earth, all before you've finished your coffee. And let's end this episode with some of the latest pigeon stories, because they are starring in headlines that sound like rejected Onion articles. There's the pigeon who actually got arrested for espionage. In 2016, Indian police detained a pigeon found near the border with Pakistan that had messages written on it in Urdu on its wings. It was literally taken into custody, and while no one ever proved that the bird was working for a foreign intelligence service, I do hope it exercised its right to remain. Ooh. Speaking of criminal enterprise, Kuwaiti customs officers once caught a pigeon wearing a tiny backpack full of ecstasy pills. That's not internet folklore.
Tiny backpack.
Yeah, tiny backpack. It's in the BBC archives. Someone genuinely tried to smuggle drugs across the border with pigeons.
Pigeons with a backpack.
Yeah, tiny backpack. It's because he's hoping to make it as a DJ. Yeah, this was all quickly followed by a whole bunch of Breaking Bird jokes, which makes sense. Breaking Bird. In 2021, a racing pigeon from Melbourne went missing during a long-distance race. And weeks later, a nearly identical bird showed up in someone's backyard in Alabama. Yes, Alabama, USA, wearing an Australian racing band. News outlets lost their minds, calling it a miracle flight. Then the U.S. Department of Agriculture got involved, and they were like, oh, this bird might pose a biosecurity threat, and they ordered it euthanized. And public outrage, fortunately, saved the bird, and then they took a closer look and realized it wasn't actually the same pigeon after all, which meant And a random American pigeon was mistaken for an international athlete and was almost put to death for it. Can you imagine?
But it had to be on purpose, right? It's because somebody put the racing band, the Australian racing band on the pigeon that looked similar.
It must have been.
Some jokester, yeah.
Yeah. And then this one is my favorite. In London, a pigeon known to commuters as the passenger made headlines for regularly riding the tube between stations. It would get on board at Euston every morning and then hop off a few stops later and come back in the evening.
I mean, it's just a pigeon grinding away on their 9 to 5.
That's right. Just let the man work.
9 to 5.
What
a way to
I love
make
Dolly
a
Parton so
living.
much. So Transport for London eventually actually put out a statement, and they confirmed that pigeons did ride the tube for free. One of my all-time favorites is the pigeon that beat the internet. So there was a South African IT company, and it once raced a homing pigeon carrying a USB stick against their broadband connection. The pigeon, whose name was Winston, flew 60 miles in just over 2 hours. By the time Winston landed, the internet upload had only managed to send 4% of that same data. So yes, in the year 2009, a pigeon literally outperformed modern technology. And just in case you thought pigeons were done conquering the human world, let me remind you that the most expensive pigeon ever sold was a Belgian racing pigeon named New Kim. And New Kim sold for an astonishing $1.9 million in 2020, US dollars.
Wait, do we actually have a superlative for horse money and heirloom carpet money? Is the most of the most now Belgian racing pigeon money?
I think Belgian racing pigeon money is up there with horse money. I feel like horse money is probably comparable to Belgian racing pigeon money, don't you? Because, I mean, it's $2 million US, but if you have horse money, like horse... Maybe it is. Maybe it is above horses. Is it Belgian racing pigeons, then horses, then carpets? You could have you could have a horse on a carpet with a pigeon on its back.
That's Elon Musk money.
That's the dream, isn't it?
Bezos money. That's Bezos money.
Yeah.
He could do that.
Someone nearly spent $2 million on a pigeon.
Okay, I checked it now. Because I really wanted to know. And the most expensive horse sold for $70 million in 2000.
That's a lot of money.
So it's horses above pigeons. But then horses is kind of like there's more there.
Well, we know somebody spent $2 million on a single pigeon in 2020, but is that actually the most that was ever spent?
New Kim was the most expensive.
Okay, so
ever.
Definitely. So then carpets, pigeons, horses. Perfect.
So it's a pigeon on a carpet and a horse sitting on it, which is not good.
That wouldn't work well. No, nearby. Yeah.
No. I got it now. I'm sorry, people, but I have to get it out here. Heirloom carpet, a pigeon and a horse having a tea party, eating croquembouche.
Yes. And the pigeon can
now
be
we
on a little
it.
chaise longue so it doesn't get squashed by the horse.
All right.
And that's it. That's our episode on pigeons, the most misunderstood heroes in the animal kingdom.
Be kinder to pigeons. That's the message.
Do you have something good this week?
Do I have something good?
It's just pigeons. My something good is pigeons. I love them.
I have something good, but it has nothing to do with pigeons.
That's all right. Mine is pigeons. Next time someone tells you they hate pigeons, just be like, do you hate the military? Why don't you support the troops? Are you a military family? Your family might not even be here if it wasn't for pigeons. Literally, though. Like, if you come from a military family, you might have a pigeon to thank for your actual existence. So the next time someone shits on a pigeon, ask them why they hate the military. Why do you hate the people who protect the country so much?
You know what? Let's just let pigeons be both of our
pigeons
something
are
good.
The fucking best. I love them.
One of our neighbors, like up on the hill, seems to have 3 to 5 pigeons. I'm not quite sure. And sometimes I see them flying around in the fields and then they always return to their loft.
Yes.
They're white, so they're doves actually. But I think the distinction is kind of weird, no?
They're the same thing. Doves are pigeons and pigeons are doves.
Exactly, but we call it the same. We just say Taube, which is pigeon, or white pigeon.
I always like to remind
Vasitone.
people that say they don't like pigeons that pigeons are the rock dove. Like, they're doves. And then they're like, oh. It changes it's funny how quickly just changing that term changes like their minds about pigeons.
That's the power of words.
It is. My sister in England has like a little like woodshed kind of attached to the side of their garage, like a little lean-to, and they keep getting pigeons. They have white pigeons that roost all around in their garden, but they keep going in and having babies in there. And it's not ideal because it's where they keep their bicycles. So there's just so much pigeon poo everywhere all the time. And so I looked into getting her a dove coat because I was like, oh, I'll get you a dove coat and then they'll just move into there. They're expensive, like 400 pounds for a dove coat.
They are so expensive, yeah.
They're really expensive. So, but yeah, they are so sweet. So sweet.
All right.
That's it. If you like this episode, please rate and review Fresh Hell wherever you listen. It really helps more people find the show. You can also leave us a comment on Spotify or on YouTube. We read them all. And yes, we do notice the pigeon emojis.
For early access to episodes, bonus content, Cinema Macabre, and the live get-togethers, please join us over on Patreon. Go to patreon.com, search for Fresh Hell Podcast.
That's right. We're discussing The Girlfriend right now, so come join us to hear us talk about the absolutely bananas shenanigans happening on in this television program, because there's a lot to talk about there. You will find us on Facebook in our private group, and you can also get in touch with us with our website, which is freshhellpodcast.com, and send us an email at freshhellpodcast@gmail.com because we love to hear from you. And also our website has links to merch if you need that. We need to do some work on our merch. We're working on it.
Yeah, definitely.
As well as all our
And
socials.
also a link to our P.O. box.
Oh, yep, that's right, our P.O. box. And that's everything.
And that's it. Please tell your pets. And not only the pets. If you see a pigeon today or tomorrow, tell them we said hi. Tell them we love them. Tell them I'm sorry for having such a bad opinion on them for the longest time.
That's right.
Be kind to them. Don't break the laws. If it's forbidden to feed the pigeons where you are, maybe don't do it. But you can be kind to them in other ways.
That's right. You don't need to necessarily support them, but don't be unkind.
Exactly. That's the point.
Have a little bit of understanding. You know what pigeons remind me of? Years ago, I was in Europe and they were getting ready for an Olympic Games. And there was a situation going on that was not in the news in the USA, but it was in the news overseas, that they were basically poisoning feral cats. They had a big feral cat problem in this place, and they were poisoning all the cats to try to get rid of the feral cats. And the rage that I felt at that is akin to the rage I feel when we do things like this to pigeons. I think it really is like we domesticated them. We took them in. We made them completely reliant on us. And then we just one day decided, nah. And I'm surprised I didn't cry more because the injustice of it fills me with so much rage. So yeah, tell them we're sorry. Sorry, that was a real rant. I didn't mean to take it.
So yeah, be kind to them. Be kind to your fellow human being. And at least occasionally, be kind to yourself. Get yourself a pet pigeon.
That's right. When you're kind to pigeons, you feel better about yourself, and that's its own reward. And as Winston Churchill famously once said during the Second World War, which is very on point for this particular episode, if you're going through hell,
keep flying. Tschüss.
Bye. Oh, the pigeons.